Slow down, easy boy, easy boy, easy boy.
I'm Wesley Peak. I go by West Peaks and also Plastic. So I produce under a couple different monikers. Based out of Kansas City, and I produce everything from hip hop to house to techno to jungle. So that's pretty much what I do. I've been producing on a serious level probably since I was about 18 years old. So that's at least 15 years. My first love was electronic music. I didn't actually get into hip hop until a little bit later, probably around 18 or so. But when I started getting into music, which was probably, everyone's typical age, maybe 13 or so, electronic music was the music that I really started getting into. But this is an Electron Octatrack, and it's a 8-track sampler, and it's probably one of the dopest pieces of music equipment I've ever owned. It's amazing. So I got a couple of samples from this record right here that I picked up in LA a couple weeks ago, and I already got something going right here. So one of the things that's crazy about this is you can just drop any sample into it, and you can go to this slice edit mode right here, and you can just slice it. You can slice it on a grid or off a grid, and then you hit this this one option right here that says create linear locks, and it'll just spread it over the grid immediately. So it's pretty accessible, like instantly. And so that's where that weird break is coming from, but it might make sense more here in a minute. I'm just going to throw a snare on top of it real quick. I'm going to get a snare. Or a kick. The very first electronic artist that really got me going was The Prodigy. And it was when they were, when they hit it big with the Fat of the Land, that album. And going back and listening to that now, you could see it. You could see the time in which it was made. But there are still things about that album that I really still enjoy, and I can see why it originally drew me to that kind of music. And then I would say for hip hop, the first albums that I started getting into would be my buddy. He was super into hip hop, and he was my really good friend at the time, and so he gave me Deltron 3030, and he gave me Dan the Automator's solo album and Dr. Octagon, and that was pretty much, after I got into those albums, it was a done deal. So to me, what's really special about Burial is his ability to kind of gather these fairly disparaging elements within culture and electronic music. And maybe disparaging is the wrong word, maybe it's like eclectic or something like that. Because he kind of in a lot of ways, he redefined a genre of music called garage, and just the music that he chose to make with the rhythm structures that he did, which were kind of UK garage based. And then to me, what that album Untrue, which is his most famous album, to me, what made that album so special was it kind of captured the time in which it was made. You have him pulling from YouTube videos and famous singers of that era, video games of that era, films, I mean, he really, in the time in which it was made, relied heavily on the use of sampling digital material, pulling stuff off of YouTube. And during that time, I feel like society was reaching much more of like a digital age. So to me, like, the magic of those albums is, for one, they're like emotive quality, but for two, kind of like this real intense snapshot of that era. And for me as well, like, that album came out, like, that wasn't, to me, like a super great time for electronic music. There weren't too many albums like that were completely seminal works of like an era that were coming out during that time, and like when I was growing up and I was getting into that kind of stuff, it was like, every year there'd be 3 or 4 albums that were just that completely break the mold. So anyway, that's what's special to me about that particular producer. I would say initially DJ Shadow. Whenever I was young, that's pretty much who I looked to be like the pinnacle of production, DJ, performer, just all around package. And then later, started getting into DJ Crush, was a big influence early on for me. And to this day, like, some of the percussion that he does, I find him really big inspiration, especially some of his later stuff where he started getting a lot more strange and out there with his production styles. And then, the obvious, Dilla and Madlib are huge inspirations. I would say at first it was more Dilla, but as I get older, Madlib. And it's probably just to do with the fact that he has been allowed by not having a life-threatening disease to have a longer career and be able to do some things outside of hip-hop. And just his process to me it's always interested me a lot. Early LP Company Flow stuff's really good. He's a pretty incredible producer as well, even still to this day. Dan the Automator early on, for sure. I'd say those are like probably my main ones. Off the top of my head, those are the ones that come to Something else that's really cool too is like you can lock an effect like on a single moment in the sequence. So I've got like a delay right here, and on this one snare I can have it trigger the delay. Mid-90s to early 2000s. Madlib though, and Donuts, I think it was more mid-2000s. I want to say it was like 2005 or something. Madlib, he's had a lot of late-in career success with Pinata and stuff like that. So it's still, to this day, is still going on. But that's when I got into it, and as hip hop had its golden era, more or less in the '90s, and I think each iteration that it's gone through definitely has its like peaks, for sure. I look back on like top 40 rap in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, and at the time I was not into it at all. And then I see the current landscape, and I go back and look at like an old, Kanye or Jay-Z or T.I. track. I'm like, this was very good for its time. So it really just depends. I think right now hip hop is in a little bit of a rough spot, and I might feel differently about that looking back on it 5 years from now. Freddie Gibbs, West Side Gun, Conway. I mean, off the top of my head, those are the rappers that interest me right now, for sure. Well, that's a funny question. So, which 5 rappers or producers would I fight? The first one that immediately comes to mind is Eminem. I don't know how much I need to explain that, but anyway, I would fight Eminem first. I'd fight J. Cole, without a doubt. I would fight Ghostface just because I want to see how crazy that fool was. I'd fight RZA, and since we're on a Wu-Tang trend. And Riff Raff. I think it depends on the type of music that I'm making, and it depends on the type of sounds that I'm looking for. But, if I'm going to make a hip-hop beat, I'm probably going to go with the 70s. It was kind of like the perfect combination of there was enough experimentation going on and technology had gotten to a point where there was some very interesting music being made. You also kind of have the beginnings of electronic music, and as far as the type of stuff I'm immediately going to gravitate towards, I'll just show you some kind of stuff here. But if I see stuff like this, I will immediately buy something like this. So this is a modular synthesizer album. So somebody made a whole album of experimental electronic music that they made on a modular synthesizer. So this is a Morton Subotnick record. He's a really interesting electronic artist, and it's not something that you'd want to put on and just jam out to or listen to. It's a lot of noise, but you can get some really interesting sounds from stuff like that. And as far as what I'm going to gravitate towards, I usually just find a stack of records. I look for things that are foreign. I look on the back. This is actually a tip that I got from Dilla, but you look on the back of the record and you just look at what instruments there are. And if there's interesting instrumentation like percussion or synthesizers or strings or whatever, then you pull that record. I try to go to record stores where there's a listening station, and I'll just take a stack of 20 records over the listening station, and I might only walk out with 3. But the 3 that I do walk out with, I'm going to have something to do with. So that's kind of how I look at it. If I'm making more electronic stuff, I'll try to go for like 90s techno records. A lot of times those have really weird, I don't know why this was a trend, but they have really weird like sound effects, or like somebody talking or something like at the very end or the beginning of a track. And so a lot of times you can grab those and they become really interesting elements.